We begin tonight with a story that's generated a great amount of conversation since Saturday. President Trump saying he could send the US military to Nigeria after accusing the Nigerian government of failing to protect Christians from attacks by Islamist militants. The Tinubu administration has denied there is a mass campaign targeted against Christians and has said that any American cooperation in fighting Islamist extremists is welcome, but only in collaboration with the Nigerian government. But there are those even here in Nigeria who say there is a calculated attempt to attack Christians and that the government isn't doing enough to tackle the problem. They cite the attack back in June 2022 of a church in Ondo State by militants who the government has accused of being members of the jihadist group ISWAP. The St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church in Owo is considerably further south than many Islamist attacks in Nigeria. The militants attacked the church with bombs and shot at those who tried to escape. 41 people were killed and more than 100 were wounded. The attackers subsequently escaped, and up till now, 3 years later, the people of Owo have not had their day in court. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Father Atta Barkindo, Director of the Nigeria-based Policy Research Institute, the Kuka Center. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
Just remind us of what happened in Owo, Ondo State at the St. Francis Xavier Church on the 5th of June 2022, which was Pentecost Sunday, when a group of Islamist militants came and attacked the church immediately after the Mass ended.
I mean, you have to understand doctrinally, the jihadists will actually tell you that in Islam there's only one God, and it's shirk to associate any God with that single one God. And for us in the Catholic Church as Christians, we have one God, but God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And so Pentecost is actually a day of that celebration. So when they attack, they are also attacking not just physically, but your own ideological understanding of what God is. And so they were having this service, and it is so sad that they had to enter this church and massacre, these people that have died and be killed. So we keep praying for the family, and we hope that after 3 years, the government should respond really to these people who have been affected by the violence.
So they bombed the church, they shot at people, killing 41 of them, wounding more than 100 people. They then went away. What have you, as part of the bigger Catholic Church, been hearing from the government in terms of apprehending the attackers? We understand the authorities say they've arrested in that 3-year period about 5 of them, but up till now, 3 years later, nobody has appeared in court.
I mean, in Nigeria generally, that is actually the culture of impunity. Or it's not the only incident. A lot of incidents have happened. Killings have happened, even in churches and in mosques. But most times, people are actually not held accountable. And that has created the space and emboldened the jihadists to continue to massacre and to kill people in the way and manner, they have done. And I think that has gone beyond religion and even ideology to a point that where we have now the political economy of conflict, the kidnapping, the banditry, and it's going to be tough for people to give that up, particularly when they are making so much money. In a context that unemployment is so high, young people have no jobs, and therefore kidnapping and making money has become a very big currency. So we are still asking on the government how to end the culture of impunity from top to bottom. I think will be very important. And the situation of Oyo is not the only one. You go to Zamfara, you go to Taraba, a lot of people have been attacked and killed, and no one is actually held accountable. And even in certain cases, you find where the government has what we call the de-radicalization and rehabilitation cases, where perpetrators are supposed to be rehabilitated and reintegrated back into society, while victims are in IDP camps living on handouts and relief materials. And so that is quite contradictory, and I think it's something that the government have to have a rethink about. and to see how we can rejig the situation.
And just in terms of the people of Owo and all the other people that you've been talking about, how they might be recovering from the attack. You talked about a lot of them in IDP camps and so on and so forth. I mean, one imagines that the psychological wounds must still be very deep, and it is something of a long road to recovery for those who actually survived that attack, and there's no programs for them to recover.
Absolutely. You look at Owo, you look at Dogon Hawa in Plateau State, you look at Zaki Biam in Benue State, you look at Kizara in northern parts of the country, and even some of the situations that happened in Bayelsa. A lot of those young boys who were affected, probably they were 7, 5, 4 years, now 15, 20 years down the line, they are adults. And no psychological attention has been given to that. And that's why the highest level of drug consumption, particularly among young people, on how to deal with the psychological impact of what they have gone through, is happening in most of these conflict-infested areas. So I think that just beyond Owo is entirely a national strategy and a national problem. So we have to find not just the physical, rehabilitation of people, but also the psychological attention that we should give. Otherwise, we end up with a whole generation of young people that are psychologically broken. And therefore, the sort of contribution that they can make to the social condition of this country could become really very difficult.
Very important point. And does that road to recovery feel even longer because of the perception that nothing has been done to address the injustices that these people have had to face?
There are accumulation of grievances in this country, either against individuals, against institutions, against the government. Why? Because these conflicts happen and nothing is done. And then the society moves on as if everything is okay. So it's really going to be a very, very big problem. How do we overcome that? At the Kuka Center, we try to provide community engagement. And one of the things that is missing, really, is just like what happened in Gachacha, Rwanda, the Gachacha project, where simply people come and sit down and tell the truth and onboarding what has been in their mind, just bring out all the poison that has been accumulated over the years and tell their own stories. I will give you an example. Myself and Bishop Kuka, when we started this program, we were in Maiduguri just to speak to victims. And one of the women said, even if you bring back my son, who is a member of Boko Haram, I won't forgive him because he killed his father and his own brothers in my presence for not believing in his own brand of Islam. And a lot of families are living with these stories, but they don't have the platform.
There's no outlet.
There's no outlet to even share really what is happening. And I think for us, it's a very, very serious problem. If you look at people, these institutions like NIM Foundation, run by Akilu, Dr. Akilu, these are the sort of interventions that they are offering. So beyond relief materials, beyond physical rebuilding of houses, the mental recovery of the person is much more important. And I think that we can only do our best, but the government really has to step up too.
And as you said, beyond Owo and some of the other places that you mentioned, there are numerous other attacks that don't even make the headlines.
Absolutely.
In other places in Nigeria, in churches and so on, in recent years. But when President Trump talks about an existential threat to Nigeria's Christian population, how do you respond to that?
Technically, we don't want to lay too much emphasis on the technical definition of genocide. I think the most important thing is that lives are being lost. And let us deal with what Trump has not said, rather than what he has said. Trump didn't say Christians are killing Muslims or Muslims are killing Christians. Trump did not say he is coming to fight Muslims in Nigeria. We believe that the jihadists and the terrorists are killing both Christians and Muslims. And so if the intention of the Trump government is to come into this country to take out the terrorists, I think all of us as citizens will eventually, benefit actually from that.
Because the fact is that the government isn't succeeding in doing it.
For 15 years, government after government, nothing has been done. And I think people are tired of the conflict. Sometimes I go to my local church here for Mass every Sunday. I have to carry with me bags, of food items, because the church is filled with people who probably are IDPs that run away from this conflict, and you cannot preach in the name of Jesus and then walk away, leaving them in the same hunger and the same social condition. And I think that it's really very serious, and people are really tired. I am happy. Really, I was mentioning to Bishop Cook, and he told me, you know what, this period for Nigeria is a God-given period. It's a period for us to have the most difficult conversations that we have always avoided in the history of this country. So, for example, should Nigeria have two sets of law, the Constitution and the Sharia? Why can't we have one and all of us comply with that set?
Especially when this country claims to be a secular
Absolutely. Country. So it's an important period. It's like we are all having a virtual conversation across the country, in the market, online, offline. People are really talking about this issue. And the risk we run is actually that this period may just come and pass as a very normal thing, and no strategic decision is taken as to how we can come out of the woods. So it's important we have this very difficult conversation.
I think a lot of people will agree with you. The bishop, of course, in charge of Owo Catholic Diocese, Bishop Jude Arogundade, has said that he shares President Trump's sentiment and that anyone who says otherwise is not being honest. And obviously his parishioners, I mean, his people in his diocese are the people who got slaughtered. I mean, do you agree with him?
I agree, because, look, when I was a student in SOAS, University of London, I used to produce documentaries.
That's the School of Oriental and African Studies,
right?
I
had my PhD in conflict and terrorism. And I used to travel to border areas to produce documentaries. One of the places I went to was a place called Lukti in southern Adamawa, between Cameroon and Adamawa.
And you're from Adamawa State?
I'm from Adamawa State.
Right.
And you just need 30 minutes to walk into Cameroon. You know, there were IDPs, thief people who were affected by this conflict. First, from Benue, they came to Taraba. Then from Taraba, they ran to Adamawa, and Adamawa at the border with Cameroon. And they call it ungoverned space. But of course, they are governed by other jihadists and terrorists. And they had to rent out land in order to farm. And even when they harvest, they have to pay a tax for them to be allowed to take their goods, to the market. They are literally at the mercy of non-state actors. And it is all over. So we need help in this country. We need help. But we still want to respect our sovereignty. But if this help will come to stop the killing, to stop the violence, I think for me is really a welcome development, because every single life in this country really matters.
Absolutely. And there are those who say that the present situation of many Christians, as well as Muslims, calls for much more concerted government action, which is pretty much what you were saying, and that the government must be called to account for the lives that have been lost and for not doing anything concrete to address that situation.
I think even we lack data, we lack information. And we need to disaggregate this conflict and identify all, the types of conflicts that are existing, the nature, the flavor, and how people, are being killed. But it's true, the government really has to do something, but particularly how to look after the victims and people who have been affected, by this conflict. We hope and we pray that something really will come out of this situation. But the situation is very serious.
Indeed. And President Trump talked about American troops. Would you welcome American troops in Nigeria, or would that be a step too far?
I'm not a military person. I don't know how. My younger brother was in the army. He was killed in Baga, And I think for me, welcoming the troops, does it mean really fighting? Or does it mean helping with building the capacity of our own soldiers and helping us with weapons? I think I would prefer, the latter. That they come, they support us, they build capacity, they provide intelligence. Because otherwise, the reaction, I don't know how the reaction will end. Because you can see that China has already reacted. We are going to stand with Nigeria. We don't know what the Middle East, how they will react. And we even don't know how the jihadists themselves will react. You also hear the stories that they have surrounded Bamako, and they are likely going to take Mali, and maybe the whole of Sahel, and the contestation between Al-Qaeda and ISIS, with Boko Haram and the Jamaat to Nasrul Islam wal Muslimin. So we don't want to get caught up because the Americans had
it could get very messy.
Messy. They were in Afghanistan, they were in Iraq. Look at the result of eventually what has happened. I think it has to be an engagement and a very strategic negotiation between the Nigerian government and the American government. And they should reach an area, where there's some sort of an agreement. But I don't want us also to dwell too much on the physical violence. There are non-physical issues, unwritten laws that people really actually go through. So, for example, the taking off of missionary schools. Can they return these schools? The refusal to help us build places of worship for certain faiths in federal institutions, for example. So I think for me, these are all issues to be discussed. There are certain places in northern Nigeria, if you are not a Muslim, you cannot become a traditional ruler. These issues must be addressed, in my opinion. And these are not physical violence. These are unwritten laws that are not part of the constitution, but they are being implemented because of the cultural, traditional, and historical context of the place. And that's why we need to have a conversation as a nation. Which type of country do we want to live in?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought those things up. There is an international assessment from some US evangelical groups that suggests that Fulani gunmen are taking over large tracts of land in the Middle Belt, driven by their alleged expansionist ideology, which they say has been going on for decades. What are your thoughts about that, given that you're from northern Nigeria? I mean, isn't the violence between, for instance, Fulani herders and local farming communities more to do with a dispute over access to water, grazing land, rather than a dispute between Muslims and Christians? Or is it your sense that it is about domination and about expanding Fulani influence and authority within the Nigerian space?
I mean, what we have seen over the years in Nigeria is at two levels. Number one, there has been undocumented internal migration, really, in this country. People are moving, looking for better jobs, looking for better standards of living, looking for employment. And most of the movement is from the far north down to the Middle Belt and the south. And once people move, they move along with their identity. They move along with their religion. They move along with their history, their culture, their language. And of course, when they settle, they don't want to forget where they are coming from. And I think for me, that is the evidence we have seen. And that is true. If you go to southern and central Taraba, for example, lots of people have moved from Katsina and other places and settled there. The second element is the environmental impact of this. My village is very close to Cameroon. It used to be very forested, where we find hyenas coming to steal my father's goat, for example, in the night. Right now, as if even the mountains have been taken to the salon and given a haircut. The trees and everything has been chopped down. The land has become naked, waterless, treeless, almost inhabitable. Just travel between Borno and Yobe. Just travel the far north. And therefore, something has to be done, and people need to move. And in that process, people weaponize their identity in order to survive, in order to participate in politics.
Yeah, people turn into their own little sort of
And so for me, this is my own reading. This is my own reading. And when you now add the culture of impunity and lack of accountability, therefore people can use these identities to dominate one community or the other. They even change the names of communities back to their own either tribal or ethnic names.
Right.
And is really what is happening.
Well, let me just make this point, because it's always important to bring out the data and the statistics. The group known as ACLED, which analyzes political violence around the world, says that if you look at, it's an independent group, that if you look at the attacks by Islamist militants in the north of Nigeria, thousands of people have been killed, but ACLED says most of these have been Muslims, not Christians. Is that a fact? Because figures from some local and international evangelical groups suggest that more churches have been attacked and burnt than mosques.
I mean, we have to position this within the context. You go to Zamfara, you have more Muslims in Zamfara. You go to Katsina, you have more Muslims in Katsina. You go to Sokoto, you have more Muslims in Sokoto. So most of the attacks that we have seen in the mosques against Muslims is true. Muslims are killed based on that region. But that is not the same story in Benue.
Yeah,
and
in the Middle
Plateau
Belt, for example.
And in Tara. But there is a nuance to this. The Islamists will only kill a Muslim, but they have to declare him an infidel first, in the first place, because he doesn't believe in their own brand of Islam. And because he doesn't believe in their brand of Islam, this very extremist ideology that they seem to align with, therefore he can be killed. And in that case, he is even considered worse than a Christian. And that's why it is quite understandable and even acceptable that from the Muslim community, it is true, they are also being killed. But the jihadists declare them as infidels because they don't believe in their own brand of Islam. But for me, it's not about these nuances and concepts. It's about the lives that are being lost and the type of country we want to live in.
Right. So I guess the real issue here is not whether more Muslims and Christians are being killed or the other way around. The real issue here is the people who are doing the killing and why they've been able to continue these killings over so many years.
Absolutely.
So what would you like to see Donald Trump do about all this? Greater engagement with the Nigerian government to force them to make people more accountable for these crimes? Or do you think Mr. Trump should send American troops? I know you touched on this earlier, but we're concluding now, so we want to round it into a sort of nice little compartment. Do you think Mr. Trump should send American troops to Nigeria to deal with these very heavily armed militants where the Nigerian government has apparently failed to rein them in?
I think for me, there will be two-pronged approaches to this. We have to deal with the military and the security aspect. But even if you clear these people out, we still have a substantial number of young people, particularly in northern Nigeria. If you brought 30,000 trucks of jobs to my village, a lot of the young people cannot take those jobs because they haven't gone to school. I am lucky I went to school. Otherwise, probably, I don't know where I would have been. Maybe even a member of Boko Haram. I have absolutely no idea. So if you look at Northeast, for example, 6 states with millions of young people lacking jobs, the only industry that is not government industry capable of employing 1,000 people is the Dangote Sugar Company in Numan. But everybody wants to have a job with the government. The government cannot employ everyone. And the private sector is dead. But even if the private sector were active, people must be educated. People must have critical thinking to allow them to make decisions. Education that can give them opportunities. And I think if you resolve that, that will be very helpful. So beyond the Americans coming to resolve simply the security and the military aspect, personally, I will call for massive investment in education. I will ask that schools should be returned to the missionaries. Those schools were very,
But you can't do those things without security, though, can you?
We can, but we have to clear out the security issue. Because these things have to be long-term. They are not just immediate. They must be long-term and really well planned. And if you do it that way, otherwise you just clear the issue of the security and you leave a substantial number of people without education, without jobs. They are just cannon fodder. They will just, be transformed back into what we are trying to avoid.
So it's important to have this as part of a long-term sort of vision, if you like, I don't know, 2040 or whatever, where each government is duty-bound to continue from where the other one left
Absolutely. Off. We must have even a bipartisan policy among the political parties. Not that one party comes to government and then, they do away with everything that was done by the previous government. No. I think we must identify very strategic issues that can help resolve some of these problems. And they should be consistent and there should be continuity between one government and the other. And for me, particularly for northern Nigeria, honestly speaking, education is very important because I believe it. I am here today because I went to school.
Father, I want to thank you very much indeed.
No problem.
You've made some very, very important points and you've made them stridently. Thank you ever so much. Father Atta Barkindo is the director of the Nigeria-based Policy Research Institute, the Kuka Center. Lovely to see you again.
Thank you
ever so much.